The task was to adapt or create a teaching resource for the purpose of improving pupils' learning. The class I was focusing on were at Year 8 mixed ability. We had been studying Shakespeare, The Taming of the Shrew, over the previous term and were preparing for their reading assessment, so I looked at the assessment as a focus and considered how I could best prepare them for this and support them to succeed. The planned assessment was a reading task, to read Caterina's final speech in Act 5 of The Taming of the Shrew, and to consider how Shakespeare explores the theme of power within the extract and across the play as a whole. Toyama stated that reading comprehension is a multifaceted, multi-layered construct that is manifested within a complex interaction among three broad factors: the reader, the passage, and the task. These three factors are interlinked. Any capable reader could struggle if they are not equipped in their own ability to read the passage or do not understand the task in hand. In this situation, Year 8 students were required to read a lengthy monologue, understand the language and interpret its meaning, and then relate that to previous knowledge, all while considering the structure and unfamiliarity of essay writing. Whilst focusing on reading the passage, I was acutely aware that other areas may slip, the essay itself, and so I wanted to look for ways to scaffold the task as much as possible. How could I take a task which was unfamiliar to them, that of critical analysis in an essay structure, and make it accessible? The national curriculum states that reading at Key Stage 3 should be wide, varied and challenging. Pupils should be expected to read whole books, to read in depth, and to read for pleasure and information. Students should be taught to write formal and academic essays as well as writing imaginatively. If we consider the requirements of the national curriculum alongside Toyama's observations, the interaction of the three factors in reading, the reader, the passage and the task, it is apparent that as educators we need to carefully consider what we're asking students to undertake alongside their abilities. It is widely recognised that using stretch and challenge in the classroom requires teachers and students to recognise learning should be difficult. If we don't fully embrace this, there will always be a limit as to what our students can do. It almost caps the learning. And so I'm not suggesting that tasks should be deemed as too challenging, more so that if we support students appropriately, their learning opportunities will be endless. We've been asked to adapt or create a teaching resource for the purpose of improving pupils' learning. The zone of proximal development has been defined as a distance between the actual developmental level as determined by independent problem solving and the level of potential development as determined through problem solving under adult guidance or in collaboration with more capable peers. The zone of proximal development refers to the difference between what a learner can do on their own and what they can achieve with guidance or encouragement from a skilled partner. Proximal refers to skills which are close to be successfully mastered, they're within reach. Vygotsky believed that when a student is in the zone of proximal development for a particular task, providing the appropriate assistance will give enough of a boost for them to succeed. To move through the zone, educators are encouraged to focus on three things to aid the learning process: the presence of someone more knowledgeable, social interactions with a skillful tutor that allow the learner to observe or practice skills, scaffolding or supportive activities provided by the educator or more competent peer to support the student as they are led through the zone. The term scaffolding was introduced by Wood, Bruner and Ross, who define it as a process that enables a child or novice to solve a task or achieve a goal that would be beyond his unassisted efforts. They go on to say that scaffolding requires the adult to control those elements of the task that are initially beyond the learner's capability, thus permitting him to concentrate upon and complete only those elements that are within his range of competence. Scaffolding sits hand in hand with the zone of proximal development and can lift students up by supporting them to achieve. The reading of Shakespeare can bring many common barriers to learning. Firstly, in understanding. The unfamiliar language, meaning and subtle inference can all be lost without explanation or without the confidence that comes from experience to just have a go. Haddon writes about this common problem by considering a question previously asked: how many of his plays really come within the linguistic and emotional range of the young adolescents? As he rightly points out, pupils would tell us that Shakespeare wrote in Old English and that he is very hard, if not impossible, to read. Secondly, in learners' own preconceptions. It's boring, it's too hard, it's confusing, are all comments which are commonplace. Also, the difficulties which come from reading a play, which is meant to be seen. When students are struggling with the language they're reading, how are they meant to be able to successfully evaluate the how and the why? In considering these barriers, I thought about how I could improve student learning through a resource that would enhance the learning outcome while simultaneously modelling what was required of the task to support students in developing their own skill set. Wood, Bruner and Ross introduced the term scaffolding and defines it as a process that enables a child or novice to solve a task or achieve a goal that would be beyond his unassisted efforts. Scaffolding requires the adult to control those elements of the task that are initially beyond the learner's capability, thus permitting him to concentrate upon and complete only those elements that are within his range of competence. To succeed in their end-of-term assessment, students would have to write an essay exploring the theme of power in The Taming of the Shrew, referring to both an extract and the text as a whole. We had been working on point evidence explain paragraphs, introducing them in the preceding weeks, but it would be a lot for students to be able to write in this format, include an introduction and conclusion, and also analyse unfamiliar language. So, by finding a way to model what was required and then to gradually remove that support should result in learners' independence. I therefore settled on the idea of using a simple essay planning sheet as a resource so that I could live model how to plan an essay using the visualiser. Students would then be able to use the planning sheet during the assessment, thereby providing vital scaffolding to assist them in succeeding in the task. The sheet was broken into clear sections, designating each part of the essay. I then used the visualiser to live model my planning, so students could see step by step what was required in a staggered approach. As well as Wood, Bruner and Ross, Clark, Nugent and Sweller also championed a staggered approach of modelling yourself to shared modelling to student-independent work. Modelling is essential for students to understand the key components involved when writing an academic response. To be successful, students must already know the content to be able to complete the key aims of exploring an extract. As students already had a sound grasp of the plot, I was confident that the application of the planning technique would lead to successful completion of the task. I anticipated that the resource would have a positive impact on students' learning, that it would be clear, concise, and demonstrate exactly what was required. By giving the tools required to complete the task, I hoped it would be a positive experience for students and alleviate some fear ahead of their assessment by showing them exactly what to do. They were allowed to have their planning sheets and the assessment with them, so by completing the task well, they were supporting themselves in their own learning. The overall aim was that they would all be successful in their assessment and all able to complete some form of essay. By coupling the resource with live modelling, students not only had a tangible document to help them, but received input linking to thought process and layout. Sherrington stresses the importance of modelling and the handover. In this instance, he describes an example where a teacher was feeling frustrated as she was modelling what was required, but her students weren't picking up the skill. Sherrington observed that she was an expert demonstrating a skill which came easily to her, but in the eyes of her students it was still too complicated. Sherrington recommended that she break it into smaller chunks and build up step by step until students were ready for the handover. Almost like a volley in a tennis match, the task is passed back and forth between teacher and learner until you feel they have a firm grasp and are ready for independence. In order to adopt this approach, I staggered my modelling with the students. First of all, I read the extract, Katharina's monologue, and the conclusion of the play. This enabled me to adopt an appropriate tone and pace in my reading, so that students were able to get more of a feel for the piece than if they were simply reading it to themselves. I then asked students to highlight certain words within the extract that they felt either identified the theme of power, were interesting, or that they didn't understand. This is something that we had been doing for a few weeks as a class already, and I was confident they would all be able to highlight something. We then worked our way through the extract together using the visualiser so students could see exactly what I was doing. They told me the words they had highlighted, and together we annotated them, along with others I felt were important that they knew. Once this was done, we turned our attention to the planning sheet. As we had already explored PEE paragraphs in previous lessons and practiced them, I thought it best to start here, as it was already familiar territory to students. The first paragraph on the planning sheet was already completed in a bullet style, so that they could see what was required. I then asked them to suggest a point for our second paragraph, and together we found us a quote to support it from the extract. I completed the section of the planning sheet with the information, expanding on the quote, conducting word-level analysis and linking to context, so that everything was set up for a full paragraph. I then asked students to attempt what I had just modelled by doing the same process for a third. We then moved on to the introduction and conclusion, a new topic that we had not discussed before. I asked what they thought should be in the introduction, and we had a discussion about it. I annotated on the planning sheet our ideas and summarised them, and then let them make their own notes for the conclusion. Overall, the resource had a mixed impact on improving student learning. Students enjoyed the live modelling aspect, which gave them confidence in their own actions, as by observing my annotations, they knew exactly what was required, and it helped to frame the task for them, reinforcing that what they were doing was correct. Some students wrote excellent essays in their assessment, but these were the higher attaining students whom I would have expected to do well. The expected improvement didn't filter through for all students. The majority did complete some good PEE paragraphs, however didn't write an introduction and instead went straight to their first point. Also, very few students wrote a conclusion. It was almost like that part of the lesson didn't take place. Overall, I felt the resource was useful in improving students' learning. However, to truly make an impact, it's something I will have to come back to time and time again. To improve the resource and its use in the future, I think that repetition is key. There can't be the expectation to model something once and for it then to be absorbed. It needs constant reinforcing and rehearsing. This is supported by Sherrington, that material will be forgotten unless there is sufficient rehearsal. He went on to say that when rehearsal time is too short, students are less likely to store or remember or use the material. So if this is an approach I wish to instill in them, I need to model it more frequently. I would also improve the resource by lessening the task. I feel in reflection there was too much on the sheet to be completed, and students were most likely more absorbed in simply copying down what I was doing than in deepening their understanding. I could facilitate this by covering the introduction and conclusion separately. We hadn't done any work on introductions before, so I feel it got lost within the rest of the task. I would also improve by writing an exemplar introduction and conclusion to allow students to see what was required and to keep it in their books for future reference.